My name's Daniel. I'm 28, and if you told me a year ago that I'd walk out of my parents' house with nothing but a suitcase and my dignity, I would have laughed. I was the dependable one, the good son, the one who picked up the slack when things got hard. I helped pay their mortgage, fixed what broke, and showed up whenever they called. My younger brother, Matthew, was always the loud one, charming when he wanted to be, cruel when he didn't. Growing up, he was the storm everyone else learned to live around. I used to think he'd grow out of it. Turns out, storms just learn how to make more noise. It all started quietly, which is how most family fractures begin. Not with an explosion, but with a slow, constant cracking. I'd been living back at my parents' place for the past 2 years after a bad breakup and a layoff. I wasn't freeloading, far from it. I worked remotely for a tech firm, paid a good chunk of the bills, and helped my dad cover the mortgage when his hours got cut at the factory. My mom always said I was a blessing, but even blessings, I guess, can overstay their welcome. Matthew, on the other hand, had never really moved out. He was 25, still living in his old room, bouncing between short-term jobs and half-baked business ideas that somehow always needed a small loan. He had this natural ability to make people feel guilty for not supporting him, a kind of emotional salesman, if that makes sense. He'd pull this line whenever anyone said no to him. Family helps family. It always worked on mom and dad. For me, though, it wore thin after the 10th investment he asked for turned into a new gaming setup or weekend trip. At first, the small things didn't bother me much. He'd eat the food I bought, take my car without asking, or borrow cash that never made its way back. Annoying, yes, but manageable. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. My parents didn't say much about it either. My dad would sigh and mutter that Matt just needs some direction, while mom would smile too tightly and say, he'll learn. I guess part of me wanted to believe them. But little by little, things started to shift. One night, I came home from work, it was close to midnight, and found Matthew and a couple of his friends sitting in the living room, drinking and laughing. My car keys were on the table, and my gas tank was empty. I asked what happened, and he just smirked. Relax, man. You weren't using it. His friends laughed. My mom came out of her room, saw what was happening, and instead of saying anything to him, she turned to me. Daniel, don't start an argument. He just borrowed it for a bit. That night, I barely slept. Not because of the car, but because of that look in her eyes, that quiet plea for me to just take it. To stay the calm one. To let him win because it was easier for everyone. That was the beginning of me realizing something I didn't want to admit. Peace in our house always came at my expense. A week later, I came home to find my things moved out of the guest room. My clothes were in boxes, and my laptop sat on top of them, still open from my last work session. I found Matthew in my old room, sprawled across the bed. I needed more space, he said casually, not even looking up from his phone. You can take the smaller room. Mom said it's fine. I remember standing there, trying to process it. You mean my room, the one I've been using for 2 years? He shrugged. You don't own it. You're just staying here. I went to my parents, hoping, maybe foolishly, that they'd set it straight. My dad avoided my eyes, busying himself with the TV remote. Mom just sighed. Honey, it's temporary. Matt's been feeling a little cramped, and he asked nicely. The smaller room is still yours. Don't make this into a big thing. Don't make this into a big thing. That line echoed in my head like a warning. I swallowed the frustration, moved my stuff, and pretended it didn't sting. But something changed in me after that. I started noticing how easily my comfort was traded away for his convenience. How quickly silence became complicity. Over the next few months, it got worse. Matthew started treating the house like it was his. He'd host parties that stretched into the morning, leave the kitchen a disaster, and talk to me like I was some kind of unwanted tenant. Hey, Daniel, he'd say with that smirk, try not to hog the Wi-Fi. I've got people over. My parents never said a word. When I brought it up, they'd brush it off as sibling tension. One morning, I got up early for a video call with my boss and found the internet completely down. Matthew had unplugged the router so he could reset it for better gaming speed. I missed the call. My boss wasn't thrilled. When I confronted him, he laughed. It's not my fault you work from home like a hermit. Maybe go to a cafe or something. I snapped back that maybe he could respect the fact that I paid for the internet in the first place. That hit him differently. He stood up, all puffed up with that false confidence he wore like armor. You think paying a few bills makes you better than everyone else? You're lucky mom and dad even let you stay here." The words cut deeper than I expected. I wanted to yell back, to say I was the one keeping the roof over their heads half the time, that without my help, they'd be drowning in debt. But before I could speak, Mom stepped in. "Daniel, please," she said quietly, eyes tired. "Don't start this." There it was again. Don't start this. That night, I sat in my car outside the house, engine off, just thinking. How had I become the problem in my own family? How had my silence turned into permission for them to treat me like this? I told myself I'd give it one more chance. One more chance for them to see me, really see me. It came sooner than I thought. A few weeks later, Mom and Dad hosted a family dinner. My aunt and uncle came over, and the whole evening, Matthew played the charming son, helping set the table, cracking jokes, telling everyone about a business venture he was starting. I watched as my parents beamed with pride. Then, right there in front of everyone, he said, "Yeah, Daniel's been staying here rent-free while I'm out trying to make something of myself." Laughter, even from my parents. I felt my face heat up. "That's not true," I said quietly, but the room went still. Matthew smirked. "Come on, man. It's just a joke. Don't be so sensitive." But it wasn't a joke. It was a reminder of where I stood, of what they thought of me. After everyone left, I tried to talk to my parents about it. My dad said, "You need to lighten up," and Mom just sighed again, that same weary sigh that meant I should drop it. That was the night I started pulling away. I stopped helping with bills. I told myself they wouldn't even notice. For a while, they didn't. Matthew kept his little empire of chaos running. Parties, projects, endless excuses. I worked quietly, saved what I could, and started looking for my own place. But then came the night everything broke, the night he told me I didn't belong in the family anymore. It started as a small argument, like all the others. But this time, it didn't end with silence. I remember the night it happened with such painful clarity that it still feels recent, like the echo of something I should have seen coming but didn't. It started as an ordinary evening, if you could call anything in that house ordinary anymore. Mom was cooking dinner, Dad was in his chair watching TV with the volume too loud, and Matthew was sitting at the table scrolling through his phone, completely oblivious to anything that didn't involve him. I'd had a long day at work, the kind where nothing seems to go right. Endless emails, back-to-back meetings, and that dull ache behind your eyes from too many hours staring at a screen. When I came downstairs to grab something to eat, all I wanted was a quiet meal, just a few minutes to breathe. But peace in that house never lasted long. "Hey, Daniel," Matthew said without looking up from his phone. "You transfer your half of the utilities yet?" I frowned. "What are you talking about? I already paid for this month." He looked up then, with that familiar smirk that made my stomach tighten. "Nah, I checked the account. It's short. Mom said you were supposed to handle it." Mom turned from the stove, her tone soft but unsure. "Honey, I thought you said you'd take care of it." "I did," I said carefully. "I sent the payment last week." Matthew chuckled, shaking his head. "Then maybe you should double-check, because it didn't go through." Something in his tone, smug, condescending, told me this wasn't about money. It was about power. He loved finding small ways to corner me, to make me defend myself. It gave him control. So I took out my phone, opened the banking app, and turned the screen toward him. "It's right there. Cleared 5 days ago." He squinted at the screen, then shrugged. "Weird. Guess it's not showing up for me." Dad finally spoke up from his chair without looking away from the TV. "Let's not argue about money at the table." "I'm not arguing," I said. "I'm just clearing it up." But the damage was done. Matthew had already planted the seed of doubt. My parents didn't say anything more, but I could feel the shift in the air, the silent suspicion that somehow I'd made a mistake. I went back upstairs after dinner, trying to shake it off, but that conversation stayed with me like a splinter under my skin. The next morning, I woke up to my mom knocking on my door. "Daniel, could you come downstairs for a minute?" When I walked into the kitchen, Matthew was sitting at the table with my dad, looking like the cat who got the cream. There was a printed sheet in front of them, a bank statement. My mom looked uneasy. "Daniel," she said softly, "we noticed that the mortgage payment didn't go through this month. It was supposed to come out of the joint account, and, well, we're a little behind." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "I transferred my part on time." Matthew jumped in before I could say more. "Yeah, but you sent it to the wrong account, I think." That's what Mom and Dad were saying. I looked at the paper, confused. Then I noticed the account number. It wasn't the one we used for the mortgage. It was one digit off. And suddenly it clicked. Matthew had changed it in the group chat last month, saying the bank updated it. I hadn't thought twice. You told me this was the new account, I said slowly, the realization sinking like a stone in my chest. He raised an eyebrow, feigning innocence. Did I? Must have been a misunderstanding. Mom frowned. Daniel, please, we can't afford mistakes like this right now. I wanted to shout, to tell them this wasn't a mistake, it was manipulation. But the exhaustion won. I could see in their eyes that they'd already decided whose fault it was. So I fixed it. I paid the missing amount. Again. And Matthew got to walk away clean, his smirk growing every time he saw the frustration written on my face. That was the moment something in me started to harden. I stopped trying to defend myself. Stopped explaining, stopped justifying, stopped hoping they'd see what was happening. Because they didn't want to see it. My silence wasn't peace anymore, it was survival. But Matthew wasn't content with that. My quietness made him restless. He needed conflict, needed to feel like he was winning something. And soon enough, he found new ways to push. It started with my things. First, my tools from the garage went missing. Then my laptop charger disappeared, replaced with a cheap knockoff that didn't fit right. When I asked, he'd shrug and say, maybe you misplaced it. Then he started borrowing money again, but this time without even asking. I'd find withdrawals from the shared account that weren't mine. When I confronted him, he said, relax, I'll pay you back. He never did. I kept telling myself to stay calm, that it wasn't worth burning bridges over. But every time I looked at him, sprawled out on the couch, laughing, while Mom brought him dinner like he was some kind of king, it ate at me. The worst part was how my parents seemed to live in two separate realities. In theirs, Matthew was trying his best, just a bit lost. In mine, he was slowly dismantling everything I'd built to keep us afloat. Then came the betrayal I didn't see coming. It was a Thursday night. I'd just wrapped up work when I heard raised voices downstairs. My mom was crying, and my dad sounded furious. I rushed down, thinking something terrible had happened, but when I got to the kitchen, they all went quiet. What's going on? I asked. Mom looked at me, tears in her eyes. Daniel, your brother told us about the loan. My stomach sank. What loan? Matthew leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, wearing that smug look that made me want to throw something. The one you took out in Dad's name, he said casually. I told them it wasn't right. I felt like the floor had dropped from under me. What are you talking about? I never took out any loan in Dad's name. But Dad was already shaking his head, disappointment heavy in his voice. We checked, Daniel. There's an inquiry under my credit file. The bank said someone used my information to apply. My mouth went dry. That's impossible. I would never. Matthew interrupted, pretending to sound sympathetic. Look, I didn't want to say anything, but he's been acting weird lately. Maybe he's just stressed about money. I couldn't believe it. He had forged something. I didn't know how, but I knew in my gut it was him. He'd set me up. Dad, please, I said, my voice shaking. You know me. I wouldn't do that to you. Mom just looked away. We don't know what to think right now. That line, we don't know what to think, broke something inside me. I'd spent years helping them, years covering bills, years cleaning up Matthew's messes. And in one night, one lie, all of that was gone. I spent the next few days trying to prove my innocence. I called the bank, requested documents, and finally managed to get proof that the inquiry came from a device that wasn't mine. But by then, the damage had already been done. The house was colder, the looks sharper, meals quieter. Matthew had won. Or at least, that's what he thought. A few weeks later, I overheard him on the phone, bragging to a friend about how he finally put Daniel in his place. He laughed, saying something about how, once the old man's gone, the house will be mine anyway. I stood outside his door, listening, every muscle in my body tight with anger. That was the first time I truly understood what he was. Not just selfish, but cruel. Someone who'd rather destroy than share. The next day, I decided to pull away completely. No more money, no more bills, no more help. I quietly transferred what I could out of the joint accounts and stopped paying the mortgage. I figured it was time they saw what life looked like without my support. For a while, they didn't notice. The lights stayed on, the groceries appeared, the Wi-Fi stayed connected. Matthew still threw his little parties, acting like nothing had changed. But when the first missed mortgage payment hit, the silence that followed was deafening. I came home from work that evening to find my parents sitting at the kitchen table, the letter open in front of them. Dad looked up slowly. "Daniel," he said, his tone colder than ever. "Did you forget to send the payment?" I met his eyes. "No," I said evenly. "I didn't forget." Before he could speak, Matthew stood, pointing at me like some kind of prosecutor. "You can't just stop helping, man. This is all of our responsibility." I laughed, a small, bitter sound that didn't even feel like mine. "You mean mine, right? Because that's how it's always been." Mom started to say something, but Matthew slammed his hand on the table. "You don't belong in this family anymore if you're going to act like that." The room went still. I looked at him, at all of them, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel guilty. I felt done. Dad looked down. Mom said nothing. They didn't defend me. So I walked upstairs, packed my things, and left. No shouting, no tears, just quiet resolve. That night, I drove aimlessly for hours, ending up in a small motel on the edge of town. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel angry. Just empty. But the next morning, when I woke up, my phone had 12 missed calls. They finally noticed the mortgage payment wasn't made. And that's when everything really started to unravel. When I left that house, I didn't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't stay there anymore. I drove until the gas light came on, parked in a quiet lot by a gas station, and sat there staring at the steering wheel while the world around me blurred. It's strange, you spend your whole life believing home is a place you can always go back to, a place that will hold you no matter how bad things get. And then one day, you realize home isn't a place at all. It's a feeling. And when that feeling's gone, it doesn't matter how familiar the walls are, you're still lost. I checked into a cheap motel that night, the kind with flickering signs and scratchy sheets. It smelled faintly of bleach and something older underneath it, but at least it was quiet. I sat on the bed scrolling through my phone, staring at all the missed calls and unread messages from my mom. No apology, no explanation, just short, frantic messages about the bills, the house, and how could you do this to us? Not a single "Are you okay?" That was when it sank in. I hadn't really lost them that night. I'd been losing them for years, slowly, piece by piece. Every time I swallowed my pride to keep the peace. Leaving wasn't the break. It was just the final crack. For the first few weeks, I lived in survival mode. My savings were there, but I didn't want to touch too much of it. I rented a small studio apartment, barely big enough for a bed and a desk, and threw myself into work. The loneliness was thick at first, heavy and cold, but it also came with a strange kind of freedom. No more walking on eggshells. No more waiting for someone to twist my words. Still, I'd be lying if I said it was easy. The nights were the hardest. I'd wake up sometimes thinking I heard my mom calling me, or the sound of the front door slamming like it used to when Matthew came home late. Then I'd open my eyes and see the bare walls of my new apartment and remember, that life was gone. My job became my anchor. I started working extra hours, picking up projects no one else wanted. I figured if I was going to rebuild, I'd do it properly. It was exhausting, the kind of exhaustion that doesn't just hit your body but seeps into your bones. But it also gave me purpose again. I began to see small wins, my boss complimenting my work, a client recommending me to another firm, a few extra deposits showing up in my account. Slowly, the fog started to lift. A few months passed before I heard from my family again. Mom called, and this time, it wasn't about the bills. Her voice was smaller than I remembered. "Daniel," she said, "things have been difficult here. Your father's hours got cut again. And the bank," she hesitated, "they're talking about repossession." I felt a rush of old instincts, that urge to fix things, to step in, to save them. But underneath that was something new, stillness. The part of me that had always jumped to help finally paused. "I'm sorry, Mom," I said quietly. "I can't do that anymore." She didn't get angry. She just sighed. "I understand." But I could hear it, the disappointment, the unspoken words behind it. "You're abandoning us." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time staring at my phone. I wanted to call back, to explain that I wasn't abandoning anyone. I was just choosing myself this time. But I didn't. Sometimes silence is the only way people learn what your absence really means. Around that time, my boss asked if I'd consider leading a new project, a major software rollout that could land me a promotion if I handled it well. It was demanding, but it gave me something bigger to focus on than the past. I spent nights sketching out designs, running tests, and refining presentations until my vision blurred. The more I built, the less I thought about what I'd lost. One evening, I was leaving the office late when one of my coworkers, Sarah, caught up to me. She was the kind of person who always found light in places others overlooked, soft-spoken, but grounded. She'd been helping me on the project, and over time we'd grown close. "You ever take a break?" she asked, smiling as we walked toward the parking lot. I shrugged. "Breaks make me think too much." She nodded knowingly. "Then maybe that's what you need, to start thinking differently." Her words stuck with me. Over the next few weeks, she kept nudging me out of my shell. Lunch breaks, walks after work, even a weekend hike I initially resisted but ended up enjoying more than I expected. She never pried about my family, but one evening, after a long day, I told her everything. The house, the favoritism, the betrayal. The moment my brother pointed to the door, she listened without interrupting, her expression calm. When I finished, she said something simple that I'll never forget. "You can't rebuild a home with people who only loved you when you were useful." That sentence felt like someone had opened a window in a room I didn't realize was suffocating me. For the first time, I understood that what I'd lost wasn't love, it was dependency. And what I was gaining was self-respect. Months rolled by. My project was a success, and with it came a promotion, and a raise that finally let me breathe. I moved into a slightly larger apartment, one with actual sunlight that spilled through the windows in the morning. I bought secondhand furniture, hung a few plants, and filled the space with small things that made it feel like mine: coffee mugs, books, a record player. I caught myself smiling one morning as I brewed coffee, realizing I'd gone an entire week without thinking about that house. That used to feel impossible. But life has a way of testing you just when you think you've found your footing. It started with a message from my dad, the first one since the night I left. It was short: "We need to talk. It's about the house." For a long moment, I just stared at it. Then curiosity got the better of me. I called him back. He sounded older, tired. "Daniel," he said, "I know things haven't been right between us, but we're in a bad spot. The bank's moving forward with foreclosure. We're months behind." I thought maybe his voice trailed off. "You thought maybe I'd fix it." I finished for him. Silence. Then a resigned, "I don't know what else to do." For a second, that old ache came back, the part of me that still wanted to save them. But I also remembered every moment of being dismissed, every time they'd told me to stay quiet, every time they'd chosen Matthew's comfort over my respect. "I can't, Dad," I said finally. "I helped for years. I warned you what would happen. You didn't listen." He didn't argue. He just sighed. "Your mother's not doing well. She misses you." That hit harder than I expected. But I stayed firm. "I miss her too. But I can't come back to that." After we hung up, I sat in silence for a while. It was strange. I didn't feel triumphant or even relieved. Just heavy. Letting go isn't clean. It doesn't come with fireworks or closure. It's quiet. It's sitting alone in your own apartment realizing that peace sometimes feels like loneliness. Over time, though, that heaviness began to fade. Work flourished. Sarah and I grew closer, from friends to something quietly deeper. We didn't rush it. It just evolved naturally, like two people finding balance in each other's presence. She reminded me what trust felt like, not the kind that demands proof, but the kind that gives space. A year passed before I heard about Matthew again. A mutual acquaintance mentioned he'd lost his business venture, apparently some crypto scheme gone wrong, and was in debt. My parents had tried to bail him out again, but with the house gone and their savings drained, there wasn't much left to save. Part of me felt sorry for him, but a larger part of me knew this was inevitable. You can't build a life on manipulation and expect it to stand. Sometimes I wonder if he ever realized what he threw away. Maybe, deep down, he did. Or maybe he still blamed me. Either way, I stopped needing the answer. One evening, about a year and a half after I'd left, I went for a walk through my old neighborhood. It was spring, the kind of soft, golden light that makes everything look almost forgiving. I passed by my parents' old house. It had new owners now. The yard was trimmed, the porch freshly painted. It didn't look haunted by arguments anymore. I stood there for a while, not out of longing, but gratitude. That place had broken me, but it had also set me free. When I got home, I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and started typing. I didn't know what I was writing at first, maybe just trying to process it all, but the words kept flowing. I wrote about family, about boundaries, about how silence can be love in disguise, about how walking away isn't betrayal when staying means losing yourself. It wasn't meant to be anything big, just something for me. But when I shared it anonymously online one night, it blew up. Thousands of people commented, people who'd been through the same thing, who said my story gave them strength. For the first time, I realized something. Maybe what I went through wasn't just suffering. Maybe it was preparation. And for the first time in a long time, I felt proud, not because I'd survived them, but because I'd finally become someone they couldn't break. Still, deep down, a part of me knew the story wasn't over. Because a few weeks later, I got a message that would drag me right back into the past I thought I'd escaped. It was from Matthew, and he wasn't asking for forgiveness. I stared at Matthew's message like it was a trap. "We need to talk. Things aren't the same without you. Call me." I didn't respond. Not then. Not ever. I had learned to watch, to wait, to calculate. For years, I'd been reactive, bending to keep the peace. Now, I could observe with clarity. Matthew was reckless, entitled, and oblivious to the consequences of his actions. I began gathering information. Public records, social media, anything to understand his current position. It was worse than I imagined. Debts, failed business ventures, and arrogant posts about suing my parents for stealing his inheritance. My parents, blind as ever, were his unwitting enablers. I built my own quiet network. Sarah became my sounding board. She didn't crave revenge, but understood strategy. We discussed plans over coffee, late nights turning into long walks through empty streets. "Make it quiet." "Surgical," she said once. That word became my mantra. I observed him in his element. Coffee shops, gyms, networking events. His so-called friends were opportunists. He flaunted wealth he didn't have. Every conversation, every careless brag, revealed weaknesses I could exploit. Meanwhile, I strengthened myself, investing wisely, honing skills, building alliances with people who mattered. I wasn't flashy, I was precise. The perfect opportunity presented itself, a major investor conference Matthew had been planning for months. His pitch, his big moment, his chance at redemption. I had subtly prepped the environment, nudging investors to question financial inconsistencies, planting small hints about past debts, ensuring that scrutiny would fall where it needed to. Every action was calculated, every contingency considered. I kept my distance, maintaining polite ties with my parents, ensuring I held the moral and practical high ground. I strengthened my emotional resilience too. Therapy, reflection, and journaling became daily rituals. I needed to be unshakable, steady. Weeks of preparation culminated in a plan that required only subtle intervention. A carefully crafted email here, a whispered suggestion there, an anonymous tip or two. I didn't need to confront him. I didn't need to yell. I only needed to orchestrate the circumstances in which his own recklessness, arrogance, and past choices would unravel him publicly. As I watched him prepare for his pitch, I felt calm. No malice, just a deep certainty that the moment was approaching. Matthew thought he was untouchable. He didn't know the quiet one he'd ignored, belittled, and betrayed had grown stronger, wiser, and ready. The stage was set. The countdown had begun. The conference morning was clear and sharp. I woke early, made coffee slowly, and allowed the silence of my apartment to sharpen my focus. Months of preparation led to this. I didn't need theatrics. Precision and invisibility were my tools. Sarah accompanied me, her presence grounding me. Matthew arrived with practiced swagger, expecting charm to carry him through. Investors asked measured questions about cash flow, debt, and partner relationships. Each question exposed a new crack. I watched quietly as his confident veneer began to crumble. When a well-placed investor asked about discrepancies I had subtly highlighted weeks earlier, his first hesitation appeared. The second blow came from a fund manager I'd discreetly informed. Invoices and documents didn't align. Signatures didn't match. Matthew tried to laugh it off, but charm was useless against facts. Questions piled up, each one undeniable. His investor's polite patience became visible tension. The man who had thrived on attention was now exposed, isolated. I didn't intervene. I let evidence, patience, and his own reckless choices do the work. Investors requested audits, legal review, and immediate verification. Matthew's charm, his bluster, and his network of enablers collapsed around him. Social media posts tried to spin the narrative, but credibility was gone. Even his friends abandoned him, leaving Matthew to face the consequences alone. Legal proceedings moved quickly. Public records, conference evidence, and patterns of falsified documents led to charges, fraud, identity manipulation, and financial misrepresentation. Within weeks, he faced real consequences. My parents, finally seeing the cost of enabling his arrogance, called in panic, begging for explanations. I remained steady, firm about boundaries and expectations. The house was sold, debts were addressed. My parents began slow, tentative attempts at reconciliation. Apologies were quiet, actions deliberate. For the first time, they faced the consequences of favoritism and negligence. We rebuilt cautiously. Dinners, phone calls, careful visits. Nothing flashy, but steady and real. Months later, Sarah and I walked along the river, watching city lights blink to life. "Do you think about what you wanted to do to him?" she asked. "I wanted him to feel what I felt for years," I said. "But more than that, I wanted to stop being the one paying for everyone else's mistakes." "And I said. "Not because of what I took from him, but because of what I gave myself. A life where I'm not a footnote in someone else's story." When the legal process ended and the dust settled, Matthew faced the full weight of his actions. He had to rebuild without shortcuts, without the enablers he'd used as shields. I didn't gloat. I didn't shout. I watched quietly as balance returned. Walking past my parents' old house, I paused for a moment. The mailbox was new, the paint fresh, life continuing inside. I turned away, feeling gratitude rather than longing. That house had broken me, yes, but it had also freed me. I walked home. Night fell softly over the city, quiet and unyielding. I was not triumphant in a loud way, but in a deep, enduring sense. I had learned how to protect myself, how to rise, and how to let consequences meet those who choose harm. The last thought I held as I closed my door was simple, undeniable, and final. I had learned to stand unbroken, and that, more than any revenge, was mine.